We are talking about at-home behavior strategies. This was a topic that came up after our training last week, and we had a really awesome training on creating a daily routine. So if you haven't seen that, go back and take a look at it. It was really fun to make. I really encourage taking a look at that one if you're struggling with your daily routine at home. But today we're talking about at-home behavior strategies. And like I said, I strongly encourage everybody to join in, ask questions, interrupt me if you have a question. I'm more than happy to put it to the group or answer it myself. So participation is rewarded. Well, kind of.
Do we get chocolate?
I wish. I'll mail you some.
At your house, you can eat it.
Exactly. So we have a few people on this call, and I actually can't see everybody who's on the call, but my name is Tiffany Cochran. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. I'm director of autism advocacy and intervention in Vermont. The reason you're able to see these trainings is that we've been working in partnership with Head Start in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont for since the beginning of the school year. And we were looking for some really fun ways to still be able to work together while in shutdown mode. So we're able to do that. We also have Sarah on the call. Sarah is a registered behavior technician. She's been working primarily at the Lindenville Head Start site, and she provides daily behavioral support to the Head Start classrooms. And then a bunch of you on the call, and I'm not going to go through introductions here, but we can chat later if you want to. That's our website. So visit us if you'd like to see more about what we do at Autism AI. Okay, so jumping in. This looks like a lot of information. Don't worry, I'm not going to get too technical in this training, but I did want to start on a technical note. So everything that we're talking about today is based in the science of applied behavior analysis. I put a nice definition up there of ABA, but really what that kind of boils down to is that applied behavior analysis is a scientifically validated approach to changing behavior by changing the environment that the behavior occurs in. So it's really, when you boil it down, the major important things to remember are it is scientifically validated. So when I'm telling you that I suggest a certain strategy, that strategy is based in research and applied practice. So something to keep in mind is if you are trying to see some change in your child's behavior, maybe increasing the good behavior that you see or decreasing bad or less preferred behaviors, there are some things that you really need to do and that may need to change before you can see that change in your child's behavior. One of the biggest things is the reaction of others to the behavior. So that could be parents or siblings or, teachers. The reaction that a child's behavior results in has a big impact on whether or not the behavior occurs. So we'll go into more detail about that a little bit later. Another thing to really keep in mind is the physical environment around the child. Maybe it's loud or crowded. Maybe you're stuck at home and so it's the same stuff every day. The physical environment can really have an impact on a child's behavior. One of the first things that we do when teachers in a classroom are having a hard time managing classroom behavior is I will look at the layout of the room and see if there's opportunity to separate the space up a little bit so that you can foster more of a quiet workspace kind of classroom setup. If there's a large problem with, outbursts or overly loud behaviors, that's a good strategy to use in a classroom. In a home, you'd be looking more at what's around the environment that the child has access to that could be impacting their behavior. And then we look at the rewards or reinforcers for behaviors or the lack of a reward for good behavior. and look at the child's motivation to engage in or not engage in the behavior. And we're going to talk about all of these in greater detail. That's just kind of a quick rundown of the list of major things that you want to look at if you're trying to see some change in your child's behavior. I guess the takeaway point for this is if you are hoping to see your child's behavior change, there are other things that are going to need to change to make that happen. You can't just tell them to stop doing that and expect that they'll stop doing it. There's really some work that goes into changing those behaviors. So, one of the first things I want to jump right into is I hear this all the time from parents. I choose my battles. I have to pick my battles. I can't always address the behavior because you'd have to be on all the time. And I'm going to kind of challenge that a little bit. When you're picking your battles, you're not being consistent. And maybe for some parents you are, but having a consistent response to problem behaviors is key to behavior change. If the response is inconsistent, the chance that the child will engage in problematic or dangerous or just challenging behaviors again remains pretty much the same. But if you have a consistent response and you're able to really help that child anticipate what their behavior will result in, then you're more likely to see change in the behavior. And if you are picking your battle, I'd say pick the most important one and stick with it. So, say you have a child who whines, but maybe they also throw tantrums and throw things around their room. Well, throwing tantrums and throwing things around their room is probably the most important one to deal with and be consistent about dealing with. So, choose that behavior that's most important for you to focus on and keep going. Come up with a plan and keep going until you've seen some success. And then once you're having success decreasing that behavior or increasing positive behaviors, then you want to just keep going even after that. Picking your battles, and when I say picking your battles, I mean kind of being wishy-washy on how you respond, really doesn't help the child learn whether or not that behavior is okay to do or not okay to do. So if you react by giving in one day and the next day you double down, the child's going to continue to engage in the behavior and maybe even start engaging in some different behaviors that are more challenging. So I have an example of this with kids screaming in the grocery store. I'm sure that all of us have either seen that or maybe experienced that firsthand. So I'm going to walk you through why I argue against picking your battles, okay? I made a chart. Here we go. So if you have a child who's screaming in the grocery store, let's imagine this scenario. You start out, the kid's asking you for some candy. You're at the grocery store, they're asking for candy. If you say yes, the child has learned asking equals candy. That's really easy. That's the easy part. It gets harder. So if the parent says no and the child starts screaming for candy, there are kind of two paths you can take here. Parent ignores the child, the screaming continues, but they continue shopping or maybe leave the store, no candy's given. The child has learned that screaming equals no candy. That's the idea. Screaming should never equal I get the candy. But if you're having one of your days where you're like, you know what, I can't have him screaming in the grocery store. I'm choosing my battles today, so I'm going to give them the candy. That's over here. What you've taught the child is that screaming equals candy. And yeah, the screaming might stop right now. It may not. It's really reinforcing to parents to do this because it gets rid of that uncomfortable situation immediately for a parent. But they have learned screaming equals candy. And I promise you, next time you go to the grocery store, or maybe not the next time, it could be, a couple weeks later, they're going to scream and expect candy. That is the lesson that's been taught by kind of giving in that situation. So what do you do when your child starts screaming? and you continue ignoring the behavior, the child screams louder. Here's where the big decision comes in about what do I do in this situation? I say you should go back to ignoring the screaming, continue shopping, or maybe leave the store if you need to, and your child will learn that screaming equals no candy. If you just kind of hold your own, you've set that limit, keep up with the limit, they're going to learn that lesson. It might take a couple of times, but when they see I never get candy when I scream in the grocery store, they're not going to expect that from you. This area here where the child screams louder and the parent goes to giving the child candy, that's the really dangerous one, because that's teaching the child I need to up the ante a little bit. I already asked for candy and she said no. And then I screamed and she still said no, or he said no. So now I'm going to scream even louder, and maybe I'm going to throw things and swipe stuff off the store shelves. And then if the parent kind of at that point is like, yeah, I'm just going to give them candy because I need to get out of this uncomfortable situation, then what you've taught the child is that screaming equals candy. And not just that screaming equals candy. You've taught your child that I need to scream really loud the first time to get that candy. So you actually, by giving in further down the road, are more likely to shape up a worse behavior than what you saw in the beginning. Does anybody have any questions about that? Comments?
Makes perfect sense.
Okay, awesome. So going back to the slide we saw before, inconsistent responses to behaviors will make the behavior stronger or more likely to happen. And really, when you're thinking about behavior change, it's more important to think about changing the behavior over time than what behavior you see in the moment. In the moment, giving that child the candy stopped the behavior immediately, but it really made that behavior worse long term. It's going to be a worse scenario next time you go to the grocery store, and the longer that they get reinforced for that behavior, the longer that the behavior will continue to occur when you're going back to the store. So being consistent and choosing one thing to kind of focus in on is definitely going to be key to making some changes in child behavior. And I want to say, I think somebody has their mic on and there's like conversation happening in the background. I just want to give you a heads up that we can hear you guys. It's okay.
She stepped away, but I think she doesn't realize we can still hear her.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to give a heads up because sometimes people forget that the mic's on.
Hi, sorry, did you hear all that?
Yeah, that's okay. No worries.
Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody came to the door.
That's okay. No worries about that.
I kind of forgot I should have muted myself.
So kind of moving on from this, the takeaway point from that is I know that sometimes it seems like it might be a little bit easier to just kind of give in, or you might be having a day where you're tired or there's just more going on than you can really, you feel like you can juggle. But just remember that kind of backing down and not staying firm in the limits that you've set is setting you up for failure in the future. It's a problem that you will have to deal with eventually. Okay, there are a lot of words on this page. Don't get overwhelmed. What we really want to do is increase desired behavior. So whenever you're talking about decreasing a problematic behavior, the number one thing that I start looking at as a behavior analyst is how do I either replace that behavior or work with the child so that they can start doing something else instead of screaming, crying, tantrums, whatever it might be. So the first thing that you may want to look at is what are some behaviors that can replace the problematic behavior and help the child reach the same outcome. A lot of times these behaviors are teaching them how to ask for what they want, especially with younger kids. for the first couple years of your life, or the first year really, you cry, you get what you want. Somebody comes over, they pay attention to you, they, check your diaper, they see if you're hungry, make sure you're not cold. Kids learn that crying helps them reach their desired outcome. But as kids get older, there's the expectation that they start to communicate their needs with us. And we really, as educators and parents, need to be the people who teach them how to do that. So a replacement behavior, instead of screaming for candy, would be teaching them how to ask for candy. Or instead of throwing food when they're done eating, teaching them to say, I'm all done. Or maybe even teaching them to go clean their plate up and put it in the sink or something like that. Or instead of hitting a sibling to get them to go away, we might be teaching them to ask for some space or walking away themselves. So you really want to think about what's something else the child can do that they know how to do that could replace the problematic behavior that you're trying to work on. Another category is looking for some alternative behaviors. So this is something else to do. It might not reach the desired outcome. So if the desired outcome is getting their sibling to walk away, an alternative behavior might not get their sibling to walk away, but it does kind of distract the child or give them something else to do so they stop focusing on the outcome they were trying to reach. This is usually behaviors that you can suggest that would distract the child, maybe playing with something preferred or redirecting them to something else. You can come up with a pretty long list for any of these types of behaviors. And then an incompatible behavior is something that you would teach a child to do that they cannot do at the same time as the problem behavior. So you can't clap your hands and hit somebody at the same time. You can't whisper something and scream at the same time. So those are just kind of silly examples, but when you're talking about our example of the child in the grocery store who wants candy, they cannot scream and tantrum and also be calm at the same time. So you would be coming up with an incompatible behavior of, calm body, quiet voice equals candy, or asking for the candy equals candy, not screaming and crying. So you always want to think about what behavior can I increase that will have the effect of helping the problem behavior decrease. So I know that can be a little jargony. I hope that it's making sense to everyone so far.
It makes sense, but can everyone hear me, Tiffany?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so this is Julia Tucker from Lindenville Head Start. So, like in the example of the candy, when the answer is just always going to be no, because it's not an acceptable thing that they're choosing or requesting. I mean, you can praise them for, yes, well, thank you for asking, but we can't, or, whatever. But I guess I'm just trying to figure out then going from there.
That's a really good question. So, the answer is no, and the child's never going to get the candy, right? Because candy's not good for you and it's bad for your teeth, whatever the reason might be. That's where you want to look at what's something else that the child kind of likes that I can reinforce them with for having good behavior. So you might, as a parent, you might be saying, well, no, we're not going to get candy today, but you can choose what kind of breakfast cereal we get this week. And maybe offer 2 acceptable choices. Or before going into the grocery store, you can remind your child of kind of the rules. The rules are that we're quiet, we're calm, we're not picking up any candy today. So
not on our shopping list.
Right, and I think
I go shopping without the toddlers because then I do not have to get any fruit snacks.
Exactly. Exactly, but I think if there are good alternatives, you can start reinforcing choosing a good alternative. Like you could have your child choose which apples you're going to buy in the produce aisle, and that's still, it's fruit, but it's something sweet and it's still really good. Or you can have them choose, maybe if you do pizza night with frozen pizzas or something, you could have them choose what kind of pizza you buy. Just small little things where they can be included in the process, and you also are able to distract them away from that candy portion of the grocery store. And I know a lot of grocery stores now, just for parents who might be interested, a lot of them have a candy-free checkout aisle. So that's something to keep your eyes open for. You might not want to be looking for like the shortest line. It may be better to look for the line that doesn't have the candy sitting right at eye level. Grocery stores are very good at marketing to children.
Mm-hmm.
I like that you mentioned
more about negotiating further rather than, when you don't have those outcome options of being able to say yes just because they use the correct behavior in requesting it. Okay.
Yeah, I would come up with something else and go towards the alternative behaviors. Like maybe the answer is going to be no, and they're never going to reach the desired outcome, which is getting the candy. But if you can offer them something else to focus on, like helping you choose out some foods that you actually have on your list, and helping them be part of the shopping process, it might be enough to distract them. But also over time, they will stop asking you because you're going to say no every time. It's when you say yes once where you create the problem for yourself. So it's kind of like you're not going to run up against a brick wall over and over and over again. If mom always says no to the candy, eventually the kids will just stop asking. They'll kind of wear themselves out on that. I think somebody else was trying to say something before too. Is there anything else?
I was just going to say I appreciate that you mentioned, talking about it beforehand, because that's one of the things that we teach when we do positive solutions for families. We talk about setting the behavior expectations with the kids, like prior to the activity. So, in this situation, in the car, before you even go in the store, you're setting the stage saying, we're here to get, these things. We're not buying candy today. So you're already sort of addressing it before it's even becoming a problem, and letting them know like what their choices will be when they get inside. So you're sort of setting the stage. I think that can be really helpful, especially for younger children.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that when you're setting those expectations, it builds a routine for the child. And for anybody who was with us last week or who checked out that training, I can go on for a while about routines. But if the grocery shopping routine never includes getting special treats, or it only includes getting what's on the list every time, it makes it so much easier to bring a child in. Then you can really set it up as an experience for them to help you with that and help be a part of it. And then maybe candy is okay sometimes. Like candy might be okay if, for example, you have another reinforcement plan running at home for toilet training or something like that, and you need M&Ms to help them toilet train. A lot of parents do that where they'll be like, you can earn an M&M every time you try to go to the potty. So maybe candy is okay, but then at that point you want to put it on your list and you want to tell them, we're buying M&Ms today. That's the candy we're picking up. So that it's already kind of clear and the expectations already laid out for the child. So the next thing that I want to focus on a little bit is this sort of, why does my child blank? Why do they do, insert your own child's personal difficult behaviors in that statement. So in behavior analysis, one of the things that we focus on, and in a lot of educational practice, one of the things that's focused on is finding the function of a child's behavior. And finding the function or the reason for the behavior is going to help you understand how to change the behavior. So I have a slide coming up in a little bit where we'll talk about what different functions of behavior are. But I just want to point out before we move on to that sometimes one behavior meets the child's needs in more than one way. I think the easiest example for this is crying. Crying can mean I'm in pain. It can mean that they're mad, that they want your attention, they want a toy, that they want to get out of the car seat, that they need their diaper changed. It can mean so many different things. And crying is one of those sort of universal behaviors that functions across a lot of different scenarios. And any behavior has the ability to do that. And how it ends up functioning across so many different scenarios is that it's been reinforced in all of those scenarios. So when you're looking at why does my child do blank, the answer might change from situation to situation. They could be dumping their toys out all over the floor one time because they want to play with them, and the next time they're dumping their toys on the floor because you told them to clean them up and they're mad. So they're like, I'm going to dump my toys. And this happens with any behavior. I mean, we're talking about children, but this applies to all people. We have a limited amount of things that we're able to do, and those things function for a lot of different outcomes. So your response to the behavior might need to be different in different situations, because if they're crying because they're in pain, your response shouldn't be the same as crying as it is when they're crying because they want a toy. It's going to look a little different there. So I found this chart on Google. I want to point out that I did not make this. It looks like it came from Honolulu Intervention. And there are 4 functions of behavior. In applied behavior analysis, it always comes back to the 4 functions. It comes back to sensory. So this is providing stimulation to the pleasure zones in the brain. This is stuff that just feels good to do. Escape is getting out of something or removing undesired activities. This is, what's happening when a child is rolling around on the floor during circle time at school. They are escaping the academic demands during circle time. Attention, a lot of families who I work with assume that their child is acting out for attention. That's usually the number one thing that parents will say when I ask, well, why do you think that they're doing this? It usually comes back to, I think they just want attention. But often attention occurs with these other behavior or these other functions. It's kind of almost secondary in a lot of situations, though, because you can't attend to a child who's in pain, which is a sensory issue, without providing them attention. So sometimes, yeah, the kid totally just wants attention, but other times it's kind of in together with other functions of the behavior. And then tangibles, these are foods and toys and things. You could probably put some activities in there. This chart has some, kind of jargon over on this side. You guys can ignore that for now. But really the takeaway from this is pretty much, everything that a child does or a person does, you can categorize under these 4 functions. I have yet to find something that can't fit into one of those categories. And if you guys do, I'll help you figure out which one it belongs in. So a helpful hint, though, when you're looking for why does my child do this, what's the function, is keeping for even a couple days a quick little log of what happened immediately before and immediately after the behavior can help you understand what the function is. So say you're looking at a behavior like dumping toys. I feel like that's a good one. So the child's dumping the toys and you've told them not to dump it. You ask them to clean up, you start helping them clean up, and then maybe you stand up and walk away to let them finish and they dump the toys back out. So removal of attention, you walking away, could be the function of the behavior. Or getting access to those toys or tangible could be the function of the behavior. But having a quick little notebook where you just jot it down for a couple days, you can read back through and see, okay, this always happens before they dump their toys out. And then when you're writing down what happens immediately after, you can start to see patterns in your reactions. Sometimes you might let them keep playing with the toys. Sometimes you might go over and say, no, you need to clean up the toys, and have like a stern response. So it's really helpful when you're trying to figure out uh, what kind of intervention to use, and it's also helpful when you're trying to figure out why they're doing what they're doing. Here we go. So the next thing I would focus on if you're trying to make some behavior change at home is finding some reinforcers or reinforcing activities. And the reinforcers can also be separated kind of into these categories. Some of them go into more than one, but if a child is looking for squeezes or deep pressure, it might be that feels really nice to them, that gives them some sensory input, and it may be something that you would do is teach them to request squeezes instead of them going and bear hugging their infant brother or something like that. Or things like water play or listening to music are good alternate activities if a child engages in high frequencies of sensory behavior. I do work with many of the kids I work with have an ASD diagnosis, and so we deal with a lot of sensory behaviors that might not be typical of all of the kids who are in the Head Start setting. Um, but most people enjoy this kind of stuff anyway, but you do want it to be specific to to your child. So if your child isn't a big fan of hugs or squeezes, that's not going to be reinforcing to them, so you wouldn't use that as a reinforcer. Some other examples, if the function of the behavior is escape, you might want to set up places where the child can escape without acting out to seek that. So that could be like a quiet zone, maybe in their bedroom. Have them take breaks if they act out in big crowded environments, like you would do one-on-one time with them if it's like a family gathering or something like that. I know none of us are having family gatherings right now, but for future reference. And then one of the things I really like to do, especially with older kids because they get it a little bit more, is passes. So, say your child's been really great cleaning up after dinner every single night, they might get a get out of cleaning up pass, and they can use it whenever they want. And honestly, the kids usually are more reinforced by earning the pass than they are by using it, in my experience. But it's a fun little way to give them an appropriate way to seek that escape without actually having to engage in a problematic behavior to do that. A lot of times, some parents use timeout as a strategy when their child is acting out. But if your child is motivated by escape and avoidance, timeout is reinforcing their behavior. So that's another thing I want to just kind of throw in there. There, something that you may think is punishing, your child might find quite reinforcing. Some of the other examples I have here for attention, we have verbal praise or playing together one-on-one. Conversations are attention. Just answering questions can be really reinforcing for kids. Kids love to learn. So if they're asking you a bunch of questions and, different variations of the same question over and over again, they might just be seeking attention in that sort of interaction. It may not always be that they are interested in what your answer is. Eye contact and thumbs up, smiles, anything like that works when a child is seeking attention. But some kids really, really like hearing their parents yell, and that can also reinforce them if they're seeking attention. So, and reprimands can also reinforce children and make the behavior worse when they're seeking attention, which is why you always want to look for what the function of that behavior is so you can help figure out, what is my reaction going to be. And then tangible is just favorite toys, electronics. I like the Wi-Fi password, I think, is a really good tangible, especially for some older kids that really get into the iPads and different devices. If they have to complete their chores before they can play on their device, and you give them the Wi-Fi password only after everything on the chore checklist is done, then they're more likely to complete the chores instead of avoiding it, especially if they really enjoy those electronics. I would like to say that food should really only be used for reinforcement as an absolute last resort. Meal times should never be reinforcement. Meal times are scheduled times that they eat, and they should always have access to those meal times. But when I'm talking about food for reinforcement, what I'm really talking about is, candy or special treats or anything like that. That's been shown through a lot of research to have some negative impacts on kids, and you definitely don't want to have issues with children having unhealthy weight because of using food reinforcement, or developing really unsafe sort of relationships with different types of food where they're seeking out, you know, candy all the time or cake all the time, or McDonald's because they earned it for something super special. It's better if you'd rather limit those things and keep them kind of special, to set that up as just a scheduled activity and not have it be related to you did a good job or you did what you were supposed to do. It's better for kids in the long run if you kind of use food related activities in a non-connected way, so they don't develop any unhealthy relationships with the types of food. All right, so how do you deliver reinforcement? This is probably one of the most important things when you're trying to change behavior. You need to reinforce the preferred behavior or the desired behavior often. So if you're trying to reinforce your child for having a calm body and a quiet voice at home, and instead of jumping on the couch cushions and screaming, then you want to reinforce them whenever you notice them being calm and quiet, not just when you've told them to be calm and quiet. And do it quite often so that they know that you're recognizing that they're doing a good job, and they might not even be thinking about that at the time. But if you catch them when they're not thinking about it and provide that reinforcement, then the child's more likely to engage in that appropriate behavior for longer periods of time. And reinforcement should happen as close to the occurrence of the desired behavior as possible. For behaviors that are ongoing, like calm body, quiet voice, you'd want to just kind of reinforce often throughout the day. But if you're talking about something like cleaning up your dishes after dinner, you want to reinforce them for doing that immediately, especially if it's a new behavior that you're teaching. Or if you're doing toilet training, and I think most of the kids are toilet trained in the Head Start setting, but with toilet training, you don't want to wait until a week after and say, like, on Tuesday he went to the bathroom on the potty. That's not reinforcing because it's not close enough to the actual activity for the child to make the connection. Let's see. If you're using verbal praise for reinforcement, make sure that it's really specific. Instead of just saying, "Oh, good job," you need to say, "Good job cleaning up," or "That was awesome that you helped your brother carry his toys over," or whatever the situation might have been. If you're being specific, that helps the child shape in their mind what the appropriate behaviors are on an ongoing basis. And really, instead of it, they could be thinking about something completely different, and you're saying "good job." They don't know if it's what they're thinking about that you're saying they're doing a good job doing, or if it's something that they did a couple minutes ago, or if it's what they're doing in the moment. So being specific is very important for kids. Let's see, where am I? And then reinforcers should always be specific to the child. So some behaviors are reinforced by parents getting mad. I talked about this a little bit before, but sometimes kids are attention seeking, and when a parent kind of turns to them and gives a quick reprimand or yells or raises their voice, that does result in the child receiving attention. And it might not matter to them if the attention is super happy or if it is negative. I think that I've worked with a lot of kids who really enjoy when they see their parents getting mad, because that means that their parents are paying undivided attention. They're being taken away from spending time with maybe the other sibling, which could be, what they're trying to achieve. So really, even though it might stop, it's another one of those situations where it may make the behavior stop in the moment, it's probably going to make it worse in the long run. Now, that being said, we all get mad sometimes, so I'm not saying you can't reprimand your kids or anything like that, but just be aware that if you're using that as kind of a go-to, it might not always work. And then with reinforcers being specific to the child, you really should look at what have they been doing recently before you try to offer that item for a reinforcer. So the example I have here is if they just spent 30 minutes on the iPad, they might not be as interested in getting back on the iPad. So you might want to choose something else like, a preferred board game or playing outside or something like that as what they're working for when you're trying to get them to engage in a behavior. And then something that a kid was into yesterday, they might not be into today. So in the structured clinic settings that we run, or the clinic sessions that we run, we're constantly assessing reinforcement to see what the child's interested in. And that can change pretty regularly, especially with young kids. You're doing a lot of play-based stuff. So when the kid's gravitating towards something, that's where you can really see, okay, that's what they're interested in playing with right now, but they still need to clean up this other toy over here. So I'm not going to let them access that new toy before they clean up the old one. And then again, I'm going to kind of go with follow through. So follow through applies across all the different aspects of behavior change, even reinforcement. And what I'm saying here is if a parent has told a child that they will be able to play with a toy when they're done cleaning up, then the child should be able to play with that when they're done cleaning up. So if you find yourself being like, yeah, you can have that when you're done, and then not following through on it, what the child's learning there is that they don't have to really listen to what you say, and they're not getting reinforced for it. So they're not really that likely to listen to what you're saying in the future.
Yeah, they don't trust you to keep your promises.
Exactly. And this is stuff that, we're talking about younger kids here, but it applies across all age groups. If you are thinking, I know I have a lot of Head Start teachers on here, so I don't want to say at Head Start, but if you're thinking of, if you worked in an office setting and there's somebody who works on a team with you and you guys are working on a project and they say, yeah, I'm going to get you the spreadsheet that you asked for by the end of the day today, and then they don't get it to you by the end of that day, then you're not going to trust their word to follow through in the future. And it works throughout all of life. It's a big part of the foundation of kids being able to learn how to expect things from other people and how to trust other people, but also what they should be doing so that other people will trust and expect and have accurate expectations of them. Let's see. Okay. So another thing to look at when you're trying to change behaviors is there anything in the environment that needs to change to make the child more successful? So does the behavior occur more in one place or situation than another? And if it does, you want to identify where it's occurring most often and actually where it's occurring least often, because that can give you a lot of info about what is contributing to that behavior occurring. So, if a child is prone to crying in crowded or loud places, they might be really overwhelmed sensory-wise with the information that's coming in, and they may need a break, or they might benefit from having some noise canceling headphones or something like that. If it happens, if behaviors that are challenging happen most at home, there may be some environmental stuff at home that can be changed. Often when we're talking about in the home, that's where kids are kind of able to be their most relaxed, and they are more likely to engage in some behaviors because they're with people who they often trust and who they can anticipate a reaction from. So that's something you might want to look at. A lot of parents come to me and they have a really hard time when they're making dinner. Like, that is one of the most common times of day that I hear complaints about is, I just need 30 minutes of quiet so that I can make dinner uninterrupted. And that is a 30-minute time period where your child has very little of your attention. So if they're motivated by seeking your attention, they might start acting out while you're making dinner, and they're probably hungry. If you're making dinner, the food starts smelling good. So you might see some behaviors during that time that you don't see at other times in the day. One of the strategies I would use for that is, if you notice that your child is acting out a lot during dinner, try to find ways to include them in making dinner with you, or try to maybe set them up at a bar stool in the kitchen if you have one, or, at the kitchen table, and have them kind of hanging out with you while you're making dinner. That could be a helpful way to keep their behavior in check while you're doing that. And the same goes for any other sort of focused activity that a parent needs to do. Is you can't always have your child participate in what you're doing, but to the best of your ability, you can try to find ways where they can feel included, even if feeling included means that you're, sending them out of the room over and over again, like, hey, go get this for me. Oh, I need that. I forgot to get that. Can you go get that? And it just makes it so that those time periods go by faster without you having to find a way to entertain them and do what you're trying to do. People are part of the environment, and this is the thing that a lot of times parents don't want to hear. Nobody wants to. I think a lot of parents go to that place of, so you're saying this is my fault, which is not what I'm saying. But I am saying that people are part of the environment, and quite often the number one thing that needs to change a child's behavior is the behavior of the people around them. So, everything that I've been talking about when I'm talking about previewing expectations before you go in the grocery store, or coming up with reinforcers, or, different types of figuring out what the function is and coming up with a way to teach them a different behavior to reach that function. That all comes back to people in the child's life changing the way that they're reacting around that behavior, or the way that they're setting up the environment for that behavior to occur. It really does come back to this in a lot of situations where you might not notice that, the parents might not notice the reaction that they're giving until they really start taking a deep look and see if it's working. And oftentimes, if a reaction's not working, it's just a matter of switching up the way you deal with it. And then we also want to teach the child strategies to deal with different environments or deal with places that you can't change. So this is, sometimes teaching different coping strategies. I know a lot of the Head Starts do like different breathing in the morning, teaching them to tell you how they're feeling, if they're feeling overwhelmed. Sometimes you just have to stick it out and deal with something you don't want to deal with, and that's a really hard lesson for kids to learn. And sometimes the answer is going to be no, and that's also a hard lesson for kids to learn. But again, if you're providing them some ways to have their needs met, ways to express that to you, and also providing them some alternate ways to get out of those situations, then you might be teaching them some really good life skills that will last well into adulthood. If a child is not able to express to you that they are uncomfortable in a situation, we can't expect that when they grow into a teenager that they'll be able to do that, or even when they grow into an adult. This really can come down to self-advocacy. It comes down to, keeping yourself emotionally strong well into adult life. Okay, so take all that stuff that we just talked about. We talked about the function, we talked about the reinforcement, we talked about strategies that go along with those, and the importance of really looking at what's going on around the child and the reason for the behavior. Take everything we just talked about and put it all together. That's the hard part. So it doesn't have to be hard. In fact, whatever plan you come up with to deal with a difficult behavior should always be easy to follow. This is for the parents. I mean, when we talk about changing a child's behavior, we're talking about the parents changing their approach as well. So you want to make it as easy as possible for you to follow, or you're not going to do it and you're not going to see any change. And then once you have a plan, make sure that everyone in the home is on the same page. If mom is reacting one way and dad's reacting another way and grandma's reacting another way, you will still see that child engage in that behavior. It might be that one parent has a more consistent approach, so the child might not engage in the behavior while that parent is present. But as soon as they leave the room, it's probably going to come back out. So as much as you can get people on the same page, you should strive to do that so that you really can see some good positive outcomes. And this is the same if you're teaching a skill. I know I'm talking a lot about decreasing problem behaviors today, but if you're teaching a new skill, if you have a lot of people who are being consistent in how they're teaching that skill, the child might acquire it a little bit faster. But it also doesn't hurt. I mean, if you look at the flip side, it doesn't really hurt to teach things in different ways too, just to give them some fluency. So it's kind of like two sides to that one. When you're talking to your child, try to avoid complicated language around, what's going on with the behavior. And I think this is, kind of just a lot of parents do avoid the complicated language pretty easily, but sometimes, especially like if you have a child who's running out into a parking lot or something like that, it's really easy to try to over explain it to them to really impress, the point on them. But that doesn't always, it's not always helpful. And sometimes they get lost in the wordiness of it, and they're not able to really take away the point. So if your point is, do not run in the parking lot, it's not safe, that's all you have to say. Obviously, there's more you want to do around that to change that behavior. You want to come up with, look at your environment, make it safer, all of that stuff. But I would avoid explaining to them, like, don't run in the parking lot because who knows, there could have been somebody coming around the corner and then they're going to hit you with their car, and then then what am I going to do? I'm going to be so sad. And that's just way too much. Even though that's where your brain is, their brain's not at that processing level. And then, sorry?
Tiffany, beyond the complicated language, like I know Barry Hertz over at London State College in my preschool course that I took with him talked about his least favorite word is inappropriate. That's inappropriate. He's just
yeah.
But preschool really, really understands and grasps that. And we had a mom in a meeting one time that shared, that her child, she was looking at a behavior as being defiant, and she kept telling her child about the fact that you cannot step off the curb. Don't go past the curb. She was trying to teach that the street was not safe. And the child just kept running straight out into the street. And finally, the child just broke down sobbing when they were being, facing consequences again. And the child's like, "What's a curve?" As they're crying.
Exactly.
So when
It's
you're putting what's a basic term to us, it really, before you're just assuming that it's a defiant behavior, you really need to make sure there's a clear understanding on the child's part of just a simple term that you've used that you may not even be, guessing that they don't know the definition to.
exactly. And I think like that's a perfect example. It doesn't seem like a complicated word, but if the child doesn't know what a curb is, what you're saying does not matter. Like a really good way to deal with stuff like that, especially really unsafe behaviors, is using visuals. Obviously, not scary visuals, like we don't want to see pictures of car accidents or anything like that, but using a visual to show them, like, on the sidewalk is okay and off the sidewalk is not safe, and really just breaking it down to what's the fundamental rule that I want them to learn here. And learning a rule is a skill. So it's something that you're teaching them, that you're increasing a positive behavior of following that rule. What else do I have here? So you want to provide reinforcement often. I know I said that already, but I just want to remind you guys, when you're making any plan, provide it often, make sure that you're following through. And then a big thing is give it a couple days to start working. Sometimes behaviors get worse before they get better. In fact, most of the time it does get worse before it gets better. That problematic behavior has worked for a child for so long, you can't expect that the first time you do something different, it's going to make a big change. You have to be willing to kind of dig your heels in and, buckle up and go for the ride to go to see this through. And then reward yourself for following through, because this is hard stuff. It's not easy for parents to fundamentally change the way that they are interacting with their child, or to change the environment that their child is surrounded by. It's something that takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of energy, but the payoff is huge. I mean, when you have a child who's engaging in appropriate behaviors and asking you for things appropriately instead of screaming and crying, that payoff is totally worth it. So reward yourself, and don't forget to recognize when you are having success. So, one tantrum per week is a lot better than, 2 tantrums per day. Even though that one tantrum might kind of shock you, it's still a huge success that you get it down to that point, and then eventually, hopefully, to 0. I'm not going to talk about this for too long. I strongly suggest keeping track of the behaviors just because it helps. In ABA, we're required to do it. Everything we do is based on data. A lot of parents won't do this because it's hard and it takes time. But one of the easiest ways to do it is keep a tally of how often the behavior is occurring. That way, if you're starting to feel discouraged, you can look and you can see, oh yeah, that behavior actually, it was occurring, 50 times a day a month ago, and now it's only occurring 10 times a day. Or maybe you look at it and you're like, well, it was occurring 50 times a day ago and it's still only going 50 times a day, so let's scrap this plan and try something else. And that's a hard one for parents to do. If anybody wants recommendations or help setting something like that up, I'm happy to set stuff like that up with you. I like making data sheets. All right. I know that we're going for a long time. I'm going to keep right on going, so stay with me if you want to, guys. So some examples of types of plans are an if-then plan. So this is when you kind of agree on a response in your own head or with the other parents or family members in the house, and then stick to it. So here's an example. If you have a calm body and a quiet voice, then you can choose a new toy. Or first clean up the Legos, then you can play with the cars. And that's really just a language construct to help them understand, okay, mom's using that first then thing, so that means I've got to follow through, or she's not going to let me play with those cars. So that's really easy, and it's not even, we're talking about coming up with plans, but this is just a really simple way to pare it down into one statement that tells them you mean business. And then something else that I really strongly suggest is like chore charts. I found this on Google. It's not mine. I didn't make it. If you're doing a chore chart, you just list the chores over here, maybe pictures. Like if the child's not reading, you might want to find some little pictures of like somebody wiping a table or something like that and just paste it right here. And then they can earn stickers or check marks or X's or whatever for doing it. And they get a reward for completing their chore chart. And I think that when I say completing, I don't always mean 100%. I don't think everybody always makes their bed every day. And if they do, I'm pretty amazed. But if making the bed's a chore and the child does it, 5 out of 7 days of the week, that might be your kind of cutting off point. Or maybe you say to them, you need to just get 20 stickers this week. And once they get 20 stickers, they can earn that reward. And then sticker charts, another thing. So I found this on Google as well. You could be giving them stickers for like maybe Safe Hands Day, or I don't like to word things as like no hitting or no kicking. It's better to word the behavior to reward them for the behavior you want to see than to reward them for the absence of the other behavior. So try to come up with, whatever the opposite is of hitting or kicking or tantrums or something like that. Or this could be for specific things when you're talking about older kids, like finished homework, something like that, read for 15 minutes, anything like that. You can even print one out and do it for yourself if you want to. It's always important to have what the reward is going to be, even if that reward is like, Billy's choice of new toy or pizza night or something like that. It's good to write what it's going to be so they constantly know what they're working for. You can do checklists, kind of the same idea. I like caught being good. This is a good ongoing reinforcement that's easy for families to do. So this is randomly providing reinforcement for desired behaviors. So an example of praise for this is just kind of out of the blue being like, hey, I just noticed you cleaned up your toys without me asking. Great job. Or maybe instead of a great job on there, like, hey, you just cleaned up your toys without asking. You're doing so awesome. Here's the iPad. You can have an iPad break, or let's go play outside, and just make it so something fun occurs after you notice that behavior so that they're more likely to do it in the future, hoping that you'll catch them being good. And then I don't have examples of these up, but there's a lot of stuff you can find online about doing like compliment jars. A lot of the family reinforcement is pretty much the same as classroom behavior management sort of procedures. So if you have more than one kid, you might want to try to find something that's easy to manage for all of the kids. This is really easy if you kind of combine this caught being good idea with a family reinforcement plan. You could paint pasta different colors for the different kids and throw them in like a mason jar each time you notice one of the kids doing something that they're supposed to be doing. Like, okay, one kid gets a piece of pasta because I went upstairs and his room's completely clean, and the other kid gets a piece of pasta in the jar because I noticed him helping, his brother tie his shoes, and so on and so forth. You can throw those pieces in the jar, and when it's full, maybe you get like a family pizza night or whatever your family enjoys doing together. It could be like a game night or a movie night, something like that. And so that really makes it so you're not dealing with stickers, you're not dealing with a bunch of stuff, and you don't even have to have different colored items. I've had families in the past who had a small jar and just got those little the little like fish tank beads from the dollar store, and once the jar was full, it didn't matter who earned something, but once the jar was full, they would get their family reinforcement. Or sometimes you can reinforce one kid, and when a child fills the jar or fills the chart, then they get a chance to do something for the whole family. So that's like a family reward for one child's behavior. And the thing that's really cool about that is it might actually mean that you can get the child's siblings in on helping them have good behavior. If you're really focusing on that, I would say use that strategy a little bit more sparingly though, because it does really point out one kid. And if they don't reach the reward, then it could mean that there could be some retaliation amongst the other kids. Some other pointers: be aware of new behaviors popping up or even old behaviors. Sometimes when you stop reinforcing something, you stop reinforcing screaming and crying, you might get hair pulling back. So just stick it out. Obviously, if the child starts engaging in unsafe behavior, that's a time for you to adjust what you're doing entirely. And if you're working with a child, or if your child or a child you're working with is engaging in unsafe behavior, it on a regular basis, it really should take a closer eye from a professional, especially if it's injurious or self-injurious. If you are ignoring it, you're ignoring the behavior, you're not ignoring the child. It's really important that you understand this distinction. Ignoring a problem behavior and still making sure the child's needs are being met. So it means that people do this naturally when a child is hurt. You're ignoring the fact that they're screaming and crying, but you're going to put that Band-Aid on and wash their leg. So you're ignoring the problem behavior, but you're not ignoring what the child needs at all. And you should never fully kind of just ignore them completely. That sets up a very bad sort of relationship. If they're asking information seeking questions, answer them once, or tell them when an item or activity is going to be available. But other than that, if they're still engaging in the problem behavior, you want to kind of decrease any reinforcement and stop conversation as much as possible. Just attend to their needs, and that's it. And then I always like to bring this up, but you should always try to avoid talking about children in front of them when they're having difficult behaviors. This can really be reinforcing, and you might not realize it, especially if their attention maintained. Talking about the problem behavior can really result in them feeling pretty good about the fact that they did it. I have some online resources here. I get a lot of my stuff, like charts and things like that, from Google. There's so much for free online. I strongly suggest checking out free resources. Free Printable Behavior Charts has some really good behavior charts. Reward charts for kids, those are free too. You can make your own using Microsoft Words and clip art. Or if you feel like paying for stuff, you could go to Teachers Pay Teachers. You don't have to be a teacher to have an account there. Or if you really, really feel like going all the way, you can do Boardmaker, but that's a subscription-based service. So I would suggest trying free stuff before trying to do something like that. And I'm sure there are millions more. These are just the ones that I was familiar with. Here is all of our contact information. If anybody's having very specific stuff that they'd like to chat with me about, Head Start parents, please reach out. That's where you can reach us. Our website is here. That's where the video will be posted. We'll also send it out to the Head Start teachers so they can post it to the Facebooks. And that's my email address. If anybody has questions or comments or suggestions for future topics, you can email me there.